be the only political joke. But I want to do my Sean Spicer impersonation. Okay, you ready? Not as good as Melissa McCarthy. This is the largest crowd ever for a law school admissions workshop, period. Okay, just don't pee on the camera, Nick. I think we could have a problem. All right, now let's get serious. I don't think my name ought to be first here, but because this gentleman to my left has 2 doctoral degrees. Dr. Barry Edwards from political science, law degree from NYU, and if you've done any checking, it's all the top law schools in the country. A Ph.D. from the University of Georgia, and been here in political science, I think, for 4 years now.
4th year.
Yep, 4th year here, and he and I did this workshop last year, but for literally, maybe not 100 years, 50 maybe, a long time. Dr. Roger Handberg, former chair of the Department of Political Science, and I did this for a number of years, so a lot of this is attributable to Roger. Oh, and here he is, just as we speak, perfect timing. Just introducing you, Dr. Handberg, as the architect of this law school admissions workshop. So, and we'll probably hang around at the end if anybody has some questions. Hopefully we'll have a late arriving crowd like the Dodgers. Nobody ever comes till the 2nd or 3rd inning anyway. So, and I know people are finishing up classes and perhaps on the way here. Just to briefly introduce myself, I've been here at UCF with legal studies for, this is my 40th year. That's nothing compared to Dr. Handberg, of course, and 45, 46, yeah. And but anyway, and got my law degree at Florida State University, and again, I've been part of this department, legal studies, for a long time. Before we get started, just real quickly, how many poli-sci people do we have here today? Great, fantastic. How many legal studies? Handberg, of course. Anybody from anything else, like CJ or business?
Finance.
I'm sorry?
Finance.
Finance? All right. I think just real quickly, we always encourage our majors to get a minor, or at least take a few courses in political science, particularly constitutional law 1 and 2, be really helpful for law school. And I think political science does the same. You know, if you're a political science major, maybe a minor in legal studies, or at least taking legal research to help get you started. And if you're in any of these other disciplines, you might consider a minor in either political science or legal studies, or the courses I just mentioned. Advisors are available in both departments to talk to you about, you know, maybe taking a few of these courses that might help you a little bit for doing well in law school. So let's go ahead and get started with, I think I can do this, yay. Applications are declining. They've kind of leveled off though, but in 2000, in the middle 2000s, we generally were around 100,000. And again, with the economy, there have been a number of years here of declines. I think it's kind of leveled off where it's about where it was the last couple, 3 years. But there are some law schools that are not doing so well. We'll get to that later. Some of them are here in Florida. And again, you have to think very carefully about what law school you're choosing to go to, whether they're going to be around in 3 years. And hopefully you want to look at bar exam results too. If there are not at least half of them, we got a couple of schools, three schools in Florida that are borderline there in terms of how they're doing in the bar exam. So again, it's a very important choice. A lot of the additional information we'll get to will reflect on that. Now, what's the timeline for when's the best time to take the LSAT? Oh, by the way, if you have any questions at all during the, and am I standing in the right place here? I might have been too far there to the left. But probably the best time to take the LSAT is in June. And unfortunately, I think more people will take it in October maybe than any other particular But here's the reasoning behind it. You want to have as little amount of stress competing with what you're preparing for. Taking the LSAT is stressful. There's no way around that. I would say most people these days are taking some kind of preparation course. You don't have to, but you're somewhat at a competitive disadvantage since most of the people that you're taking the test with are going to be having a prep course. We're not allowed to recommend any particular course, but some of the student organizations that are around, typically Phi Alpha Delta, which is for both legal studies and political science, and anyone else who's interested in pre-law, probably word of mouth. It's probably more who's teaching the course than necessarily the course, but you certainly do want to get properly prepared for the test. But it's usually the first week of June, and what you can do, hopefully in theory, is not take any courses during the A term, because 4 to 6 weeks before is when you do most of the major preparation, and then you got nothing else competing with you when you take the exam. You can still take a B term course, a couple of B term courses if you just really need to go in the summer, but that way you're concentrating on one thing. You're not inundated with a bunch of other stuff you have to do for the university. Again, usually, this year's a little different with the hurricane, but usually last week in September, first week of October, that's the next best time to take it. Again, if you take it in June and you get the results back, you have 2 more options here before deadlines to the best schools are going to come up. So that's another reason to do it. But usually that's right around the time when a lot of people give tests that after 4 or 5 weeks. Maybe not always, but if you get to December, that's probably the worst time to take it. Because when is it always? The first Saturday in December, right before final exam week. You probably have the flu, or just had it, or a cold, or you're just worn out from the semester, and you got the test coming up, and then you try to do well on the LSAT. So if you're in a situation now where you're going next fall, you don't have an option. But if you have a chance to plan it out, number one, plan A, try to take it in June, plan B, October, and then probably the worst option would be December. Some law schools will take a February exam, so it's possible to do that, and obviously you want to check with that individual law school to see if they'll take it. Now, you want to get things rolling on your application in October and November, drafting your personal statement, letters of recommendation. Now, with letters of recommendation, you want to get somebody who you've taken a course with. I maybe once or twice I've written letters for people that weren't students of mine, but that's your best bet, is to get somebody who has some experience with you. Now, the problem is, of course, there's a lot of online courses, so it may be difficult to get somebody who knows you. Particularly at the University of Florida, I think the entire business degree is online, and they've actually dispensed with requiring letters of recommendation. It's optional. So you definitely want to check with the school on how important it is, whether it's required or whether it's optional. Probably a good idea to have them, but you want to give the person writing the letter enough information. Maybe a draft of your personal statement, your resume, your class audit. They need to know your LSAT score. If I don't mention that in the letter, the admissions committee is going to think, hey, would he have still written the letter if he knew it was so low? Or if it's high, you want to emphasize it. So always better to have that. Each professor is different on what they require, whether they will need any particular item, but I think generally you want to have somebody that has the most information possible, so they can have a personalized letter that'll give you the best chance to get in. And let's see here, December, January, you want to follow through with the applications. It's never a problem to call the admissions office of the law school. And again, there are law schools that will accept applications later. I don't think there's anybody that has a deadline any earlier than January 15th. There may be, but generally it's sometime between January 15th and March the 1st for most of the law schools that you would probably most like to get into. Now again, if you take the February bar exam and score 172, I bet somebody might take a look at your application later, but you want to check. The policy of each law school may vary. But you definitely want to follow through and get those letters in as quickly as possible. By the way, Dr. Henberg always used to mention this, so let me do it. If you have, it's like pulling teeth to get somebody to write a letter, find someone else if someone really doesn't want to write one for you, because you want a good one. I think most of the time when I decide to write one, I'll tell someone ahead of time if I don't feel like I can write one. But you don't want someone to say, okay, because you browbeat them, and then you end up with a crappy letter in the file. That's not helpful. Again, you need to follow through with all the rest of the stuff here that you're required to do through LSDAS. And I don't know who put Wake Conley here. I think Dr. Handberg did. Theoretically, that's what you're supposed to do. You're not going to do it. So anyway, hopefully you will get a positive result. Usually you get notifications in March and April, sometimes later. Most law schools have a rolling admission. If you really got the nice scores there, both LSAT and GPA, you're going to get admitted earlier, but they're going to see, what their, how nice their class can be. So there may be some period of time where they will wait to notify you if you're toward the middle of the pack there in terms of the scores that they're looking for. And then you have from May until you get started to make financial arrangements. We've got a little segment on that later. And I think we're ready to turn it over to Mary here, I think, on GPA and LSAT. So, and again, if you have questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, so assuming you get your application material, and I just want to share my thoughts based on my personal experience and a little bit of research about how law schools judge admissions and make admissions decisions. It's fairly straightforward, I would say, much more straightforward and predictable than college admissions are. The two main criteria are your undergraduate grade point average, all the classes you've taken for college, even if they're transfer classes, like your overall college GPA. So if you have master's classes, those usually get ignored. Focus on your undergraduate GPA. And the second big criteria, no big surprise, already mentioned it, the LSAT. Those are the two criteria, and there's some consideration to other things. I would say if your schools publish their median GPAs, median LSAT scores. My experience, what I've heard from other people, it's like if you beat the median on both LSAT and GPA, you will be admitted. If you're lower than the median on both the LSAT and GPA, you will not be admitted. Unless there's some very special circumstances, like your father's a senator or something like that, or alumni of the school. But if you split them, like you are higher on GPA but lower on the LSAT score, that's when the other factors come into play. GPA, obviously, the higher your GPA, the better your chances of admission. It would depend on the school as far as like what their cutoff is, and I'll have a slide in a second that kind of shows where the cutoffs are visually. And same with the LSAT score, the higher the score, the more likely your admissions. And I think the way you want to think about this, when I talk about this with students sometimes, law schools are kind of in it partly for what works best for them in terms of admitting. And they want to have a high ranking because that comes with more applications and more prestige. So they want to get a prestigious group of students admitted into their classes. And when you look at the rankings of a school, you all, when you guys do this, you look at what is the GPA of their incoming students, what's the LSAT of their incoming students. And those schools want to post high numbers to have a smart, by the numbers, incoming class. So the higher GPA or LSAT score you can offer that school, the more they can brag about their incoming class. So what really, on the numbers, what you can do for them. bragging about you as incoming students. Yeah.
And when I see the last slide, I really wanted to see the GPA slide, and I would just take a picture.
Sure. So the ranking services that rank law schools that factor in things like GPA of the incoming class, LSAT of the incoming class. That's why these things are really important to the schools. And in some ways what you mean to them. So here, I've got the median scores on the GPA and the LSAT for the law schools in Florida, and it plotted them so you can see how different schools place their incoming students. And the blue line is just the regression line to kind of show the balance between the two. And the further out you go to the upper right corner, the more competitive the admissions process. The further to the lower left, the less competitive the admissions process. So let's say a school like Florida Coastal here, their incoming class median is about a 2.7 GPA and a 143 LSAT. And like I said, like if you meet both those medians, you're likely to be admitted. If you're got higher on one, lower on the other, they may consider other factors. And based on the way the schools kind of line up, that's the, if you can see closely, the diagonal lines in gray. And those kind of run to the line for how competitive you would be and what kind of school that would place you at. And law schools are fairly formulaic to make the admissions rather predictable. And if you're curious, these are just the Florida schools. I took a few minutes to extend it out a little bit if you're thinking about like a private school out of state or a higher ranked school. But they're still kind of on the same line here where the competitiveness of the school is a factor of the GPA and the LSAT score, and they all seem to have a balance they strike of the importance of those things. And all schools want students that are higher on both dimensions. And if the median is higher on both dimensions, that makes the admissions process more competitive. Seems like some of our state schools in Florida, like Florida, FSU, and FIU, maybe tilt a little more heavily to the GPA, and some other schools, like Columbia sort of stands out, leans more heavily to the LSAT. But these two major factors are combined in some way to determine the admissions policies of the schools, which makes your undergraduate GPA as well as your LSAT score really important.
Barry, can I just point out something? This is a great chart, by the way. But you notice the 5 schools that are ranked in Florida are grouped right there: Florida, FSU, Miami, Stetson, and FIU. The other schools are not ranked. And so I think it probably doesn't need to be said, but you want to try to get in one of those 5 if at all possible. That should be your plan A if you're going to go to school in Florida. And of course, obviously, if you can step up, that's important too, but that's why they're grouped where they are. And that chart reflects it probably better than anything. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt it.
That's it. Talking to students, I get some questions about, would this or that make me more attractive or competitive in the admissions process? Like students will say, if I join this group, would that make me look better to the admissions committee? So, number one, I would say, this is what you look like to the admissions committee. You are 2 numbers primarily, the GPA and the LSAT score. And there could be some other considerations if you're borderline. But those other things that you think this might look good or this might look good are typically ignored because it boils down to 2 primary numbers in the admissions process. And then more importantly, I would just say someone is a older person here and who's kind of been through college, just reflects some maybe wisdom on you. Don't plan your life according to what you think an admission would look good to a law school admissions officer. Do what you think is your path and good for you. So if you're thinking like, I should join this group that serves, this underserved community, and I really am not interested in this, but I think it would make me look good to someone else. Don't do that. Do the things that are like authentic to you, that you think are important for you and your career and your future. Because there are all sorts of different types of lawyers in the world, all sorts of different classes in law school. And no matter really what your ambition is, there's a place where you can fit in a way that you can serve. And ultimately, like, if you're going to succeed, you've got to like what you're doing and be good at it. And if you're doing something because you think some admissions officer will look into them or give you a little bit better of a chance, if it's inauthentic, you're not going to stick with it, and you're trying to lead someone else's life, not your own life. So these are the things that they look at, because it's really good for their rankings. And don't warp your life according to what you think would look good, because they'll probably ignore it, and then you're missing some other opportunities. Oh, yeah, so this is another question that comes up a lot, like if you're disappointed with your LSAT score, should you retake it? So I'm kind of a numbers guy, so some data from 2012 looked at like people that retook the LSAT, what happened to them. So the majority out of 123, 65% went up. But they went up just a marginal amount, like 1 to 3 points. Essentially just kind of if you randomly had a bad day, maybe the regression to your mean score will boost you up 1 to 3 points. A fair number of people don't change, and then some people go down, kind of again by random. If you think you have a mean score you're likely to get, given the batch of questions on the test or how you were feeling good or bad, it could have some amount of random variation. But I would say, like, if you're retaking it, unless you do something systematic to change your score, like a long-term study plan, several additional years of education, your score is unlikely to change by anything other than a random amount. And you may learn, like, if you take a test class, a test prep class, some tricks to the test, just get some more familiarity and comfort with the test, how fast it goes by, the pace you need to be on. That can probably increase your score a couple points. And then there's some, random fluctuation in your score. But the only thing that really is going to drive your score up a significant amount in the long term is some long-term study strategy, to build your intellectual aptitude, your vocabulary, your critical thinking skills. And I always tell students, like, the best thing to do to practice for the LSAT is to read challenging material, write critically, and practice thinking critically. And if you think about it, where would you all have an opportunity to read challenging material and then answer questions about the challenging material you read? In college, all the time, right? You're given material to read out of a book that's written at the college level with a sophisticated vocabulary, and then you're asked to write about it sometimes, you're asked questions about what you've read. So you have the opportunity, you've already paid for it, to practice these skills every day. So that's the main thing that will drive your scores up. You want to?
Yeah, just one thing I would point out. When you retake the LSAT reports all your scores. So if you take it the first time, just to kind of take it, you'll get that score. That score will track you all the way. And so anytime you take the test, take it for real. Otherwise, don't take it.
Yeah. And the last note here, then on the side, is they've changed some rules recently, just I think for this current year with taking the LSAT and how many times you can take it. The new rule, it used to be you take, I think, 3 times in 2 years. And they waived that now because the more times you take the test, the more income it is for people who sell the test. So you can take it as many times as you want to now. But there's not a standard rule that law schools use in terms of their admissions. Like some schools would take your highest score based for the admissions purposes, and others would average your scores and look at them all. And there's not a standard rule that the law schools have to follow. It goes kind of on a law school by law school basis. But since for reporting purposes and bragging purposes, they can report your highest score. So in some ways, even though they look at it, if you have that high score, they will boost their median for ranking purposes. That can be pretty good for you. So I don't think there's too much of a downside to retaking it. But if you're just retaking it again and again, hoping your score improves just by random luck, it's unlikely to. I mean, because the LSAT's a pretty long test, right? There's a lot of questions on it. So even if you got lucky at one, it kind of averages out and comes close to your true score.
Oh, hey. Excellent information there. All right, personal statement. Let me just start with the obvious. This is going to be reviewed by an admissions committee, at least one of which is probably going to be somebody on law review or connected with it. So you better make sure it's grammatically correct. Whatever else you do, there's a tweeter-in-chief that sometimes has problems like this. You want to make sure that somebody is maybe proofreading this for you or looking them over to make sure. We have some help like that out here at UCF where they can look over and make sure that, that you got the grammar right, and you got the spelling right. But this should be about you. It should be about how you got to where you are. Now, there are some, I think we both have, I know most of the material I have, still got my copies, I got from Dr. Handberg, but we have it in both departments on how to write an effective personal statement. There's some books about it too. I'm sure some of you have gone to bookstores and found some of that stuff. But I think probably the most, what they want to know is how did you get to this point? What have you done in your background? Is there anything special, anything different about you that would make you stand out? And as Dr. Edwards said, most of it's going to be your GPA and your LSAT. But most schools have at least a percentage, relatively small percentage, because remember it's median, not average. So they can afford to take a chance on maybe a few folks that have some really cool things in their background. I remember Dr. Handberg talking about a woman who had been, who served during the Gulf War and didn't think that really that was anything anybody needed to hear about. Well, of course it is. What an experience to have. And that sets her apart. They do want to have a decent mix of students, at least a good law school will. They won't want everybody to be between 22 and 24 with a political science or legal studies or business degree. They do want a good group of students, so you have some different backgrounds. But just to give you one example, at U of F, somebody that Dr. Handberg and I both know had a 145 on the LSAT, but great GPA on the President's Leadership Council here, and he was from Russia. English isn't his first language. There's a reason why the LSAT score wasn't that high. And the admissions committee at U of F took that into account. He ended up in the top third of his class at U of F. Has a great job right now, and actually is teaching as an adjunct for the law school at U of F. And we were both involved about 15 years ago to help this individual. But they look past that score. Now, are they going to do it on a routine basis? No, but if you've got something special in your background, talk about that. If there's something you've overcome, if you, maybe something, some tragedy in your family or something, particularly if the scores are low for 1 year. Had situations like that too, where there's a reason why. Maybe the student had cancer or someone in the family had a heart attack and they had to help. And they literally had a terrible semester or two and everything else looks great. This is your opportunity to explain. But if you're going to write about how you're going to save the world and that you want world peace and, you know, kind of like in the Miss America contest and stuff, they're not interested in that. If you're going to write that, at least make sure it's grammatically correct. But they want to hear about you, stuff that you've done, things you've been through, experiences you've had. It's the best way to do it. Again, already talked about letters of recommendation. Most schools will tell you 2 or 3, and it's not mandated for every school. So you always can check the admissions officer. We had them all here about 2 weeks ago. The different law schools, literally I think 2 weeks ago from yesterday. And we're going to have them again here in February, Phi Alpha Delta. All the Florida law schools were here except for FAMU, and that was just a glitch. Somebody was supposed to show up and didn't. And we had Emory, we had St. John's, we had Boston University, so we'll have a good mix of other universities here as well. But you can call them, you can go visit, but talk to them about specifically what they want. Yeah. Oh, you want?
Yeah, I just want to share a thought about letters of recommendation. I get asked to write them occasionally. When you apply for law school, you're going to send in your transcript. You're going to send in your resume. And so a good letter would tell the law school something that's not on your transcript, not on your resume. So if a professor, you think about a professor, you got good, A's in their class, they're going to get their transcript, so they know you got the A's in his or her class. So the good letter would tell them something they don't already know about you. And I always suggest to students, think about the best research paper or term paper you wrote in while you were an undergraduate, regardless of what subject it is in, that would be probably the best person to write a letter of recommendation for. Because your quality of your writing, the extent of your writing, your research ability doesn't already appear on your resume or transcript. And a good letter should be able to speak to that. That's something that law schools are really interested in. And they want to know it from any discipline or any field. And hearing that from someone who teaches in the anthropology department would be better than someone who teaches constitutional law saying, you got an A in constitutional law. Because they know that, it's on your transcript. I can't tell them anything that they don't already know. So, and if you're thinking about like planning to get a good letter, think about, what a professor could say about you that isn't already on your transcript. In terms of your independent research, your writing, your initiative, your creativity, overcoming hardships, that sort of thing. 'Cause that's what I think a letter can really contribute.
Absolutely great advice, and again, that's what the personal statement too can help give to the letter writer, is more information about your background. And again, choosing your letter writer is very important, as Dr. Edwards just mentioned. I briefly mentioned this Dean's questionnaire. There are a few small schools that use this, but it's not as prevalent as it used to be. In some of the small northeastern schools, when a lot of this process started, it'd be 1,500 to 2,000 students, and the dean of the school would probably pretty much know everyone. And it's just not something that most law schools are looking at. Now, in terms of other evidence of diverse experience, I've kind of mentioned some of that. But any kind of experience that you've had that sets you apart, maybe from and you might even think it doesn't always have to be academic. If you've been on an athletic team, the fact that you've had to budget your time, do well in school, and find time to properly prepare for the sport. You've also worked with others, and the teamwork concept. Even something that doesn't appear to be academic might be of some help. One of the guys I went to law school with was a guy named Tony LaRusso. And a lot of you probably wouldn't know the name, but I think he might be number 3 in terms of number of games won. He was the manager of the St. Louis Cardinals, and I think the Oakland A's too, for forever. And he was there, I think he had one more year to go. But we were on the quarter system then, and he would go to the fall and the spring semester. And so it took him 4 years to graduate, and but boy, having a Major League Baseball player in your law school it makes it a little more diverse. It's different. So law schools are looking for not just everybody to be in the cookie cutter, legal studies, poli-sci, business realm. So certainly you want to point out anything that's different in your background. Now, I don't know if that's you or me, but I'll go ahead. Yeah.
How far back would be appropriate time for that?
Well, boy, it depends on the circumstance. I've had students that have come over when they were 3 or 4, maybe from another country. That's an excellent story to tell. What you had to do, what you had to overcome in terms of adjusting to a new country and learning a language and everything. So I don't think there's any set time that you wouldn't, and I'm in your personal statement. And then when you give that to the letter writer will decide how much of that. I don't always just parrot whatever in there, but there's something fairly significant in the personal statement. That's where I can get it. That's why I like to have both the resume and the personal statement. And it doesn't have to be your final draft. If I have at least some of it, it gives me something to work with. Yes, sir.
So your letters of recommendation can only come from professors? Like you can't?
Oh, no. You want to check again with each school, but usually if they want 3, probably 2 of them should be, and maybe 1 can be from somebody that you've had some significant work experience with, particularly if you're able to pull this off. I know we have internships in both of our programs, but let's say that you had an internship with a law firm, and often here in Florida, you're going to have somebody from U of F or somebody from Florida State. But if it's somebody you work with that saw your work product, as Dr. Edwards pointed out, maybe you've done some memorandums of law for them when you worked in your internship. You've done some writing for them. perfect person to write that extra letter because they've seen your writing, they've seen your ability to interact, ability to do research, all that kind of stuff. And they're from the school, they're alumni from the school you're seeking, and even if it's U of F or FSU, vice versa, as much as there might be the rivalry, they give credit to anything like that. So you don't necessarily have to always worry about pinpointing it to a particular school. But someone you've actually worked for. Now, it's not, if you don't have any other option and it's just Publix, that's not a bad thing, but it might be better if it was law related. If you have that option, you may not have it. Yes, go ahead.
Is that a limit? Is there a limit for how many letters of recommendation? So like say if
I
the
don't know
law
that there is, but I don't know that they're gonna wanna read more. The law school may tell you there's a limit, because they don't wanna read 10 of them. So if they say 2 or 3, do 2 or 3. I think that's probably the right. I don't know off the top of my head, Dr. Hamburg, do you know if there's,
No,
they don't-
a lot of them prefer the fewest number of letters if they're relevant.
you
They're
know,
not interested in getting 15 letters.
right,
Now, it's easier now because your letters will go through the Credential Assembly Service.
right,
And electronically, it can be sent to them, so the letter writer doesn't have to write a letter. Used to be you wrote a letter for each law school,
right.
which was a killer.
You know, we both remember that time where literally you had to tailor your letter to each law school, and now you just kind of write the one, and unless they say gets a hold of it. Oh, your question?
Oh, I was gonna say, most of the school websites tell you
Yeah.
how many they want and what they need.
Yeah, and again, if you need clarification, admissions folks are good. Now, just the automatic admits and automatic rejects, shouldn't we change that, make it a little more politically correct to non-admits? Because you don't want to call someone all right, we can't be too snowflakey here. But the automatic admits, usually there's a formula that the law school will use, and they'll take your LSAT and multiply it and your GPA. Some weight LSAT a little bit more. I know the ranking service does, so that's one of the things that motivates them to stop here, you pointed out earlier. And if you're in if you got a certain score, you're in the automatic admit category. And same thing is true if you're both of them are low. And if one's high and one's lower, I'd rather have the LSAT higher than the GPA. Not personally, it's just you got a better shot at getting in. You might be able to explain away. You could probably explain either one of them if they're low. I'm not saying that can't be done in a letter and in a personal statement. But of the two, I'd rather have the high LSAT and the lower GPA than the other way around. But a lot of people, particularly students from UCF, fall in that middle category. They've got good scores, but maybe not great scores, and good GPAs. A lot of them have better GPAs, and the GPA the LSAT may be a little lower. But you're in that whole category, and that's where the letters of recommendation, other information that you might want to supply the law school can be of help. I'm not sure if this is where we ought to admit well, let's just briefly mention this too about the evaluation service. I know when this first came out, I know Dr. Hamburg did a little thing on it here, but this is just almost impossible to do these days, particularly for professors that teach online. There's no way you can rate your students on all these 30 different individual attributes. So there are very few law schools that will want this or that will require this. But it was a thing about 10, 15 years ago, not so much anymore. But a lot of, the law school will tell you how they want this information handled. If you have any kind of problem in your background, the one thing you want to make sure that you do is be upfront about it. There are students that have arrests, maybe even convictions. And I know if anybody's been in my criminal procedure class, you know that if you have a conviction, it cannot be expunged or sealed. It has to be a withhold, or you have to have the charges dismissed. Technically, the statute says you have to acknowledge it when you're applying for admission to the Florida bar. It doesn't say that you have to if you're applying for law school. But I would not take anything that I say here as direct legal advice. You would want to talk to me or someone else, an advisor, about that issue ahead of time and see what your precise situation is. Don't take this as advice on how you can answer a question concerning an arrest, because every situation is different. But if there's something like that in your background, most of them have you, they have an addendum that they want you to add where you will explain the situation. The best possible scenario is to be completely honest. Now, normally I wouldn't tell a client that in real life, but what's going to get you in trouble with the bar and with law schools is not being honest about something and having them find out that you've been untrustworthy. So be straightforward, particularly if something got dropped. That's probably not going to keep you, it definitely won't keep you out of the Florida bar unless you lie about it. But when you get to the Florida bar stage, we had a student a long time ago that lied about traffic tickets that he had in Texas, and it took him 2 years to get that cleared up. Because lying to the bar is frowned upon. So you really don't want to do something like that. I think we might be scholarships. Is that you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so the financial side of law school. A big, I guess, picture thing here would be law school should be thought of, I think, as an investment sort of decision. Like law is a business primarily. You want to think about the cost of attendance, both in terms of the tuition dollar, living expenses, and your time, against the potential return you could get from it, from practicing law, and then be able to make a decision. Is it worth the investment of time, and then how can you maximize the return on your investment? So there are scholarships at different schools, and I think some of the pricier schools have high sticker costs and reduced at times for some students, awarding on a tuition waiver or some scholarships. But the overwhelming majority of law students do take loans for school. It's difficult to work during law school. It's primarily a full-time, going to school full-time. And the grades in law school are significant enough where you wouldn't want to undercut your grades by working your way through law school.
So is there any kind of student financial aid?
Well, the aids would be primarily, if the school doesn't give you a scholarship or tuition waiver, the aid would primarily be student loans. Either, some are subsidized or unsubsidized.
So there's no grants like there is here at UCF or any other university?
Well, a school could grant some money, but no, I think for the most part, it's either funded by scholarship from the school or loans to the student.
There are some schools will give you a tuition waiver, a big break the first year, particularly some of the private schools. But the condition is that you are maybe in the top 10%, and you might think that you can do that, but you don't necessarily know that you can. And the problem is, once you go to law school for a year, well, I could go and I can transfer. It's not as easy as you might think. You really can't. It's really difficult. You can, but you've got to be in that top 10% category. So if ever you get an offer, this is good advice for anything that appears too good to be true, look at the fine print and make sure that this scholarship will continue. Because if you're looking at Stetson or Miami and you're in the mid $40,000 a year range, that's a huge deal. And for all the private schools, that is a major concern. So even though they might take care of that first year, you still got 2 more years. And as Dr. Edwards pointed out, look at some of the debts that you can run up. And this is from 4 or 5 years ago. Let's go ahead and take that over there.
Yeah, so law school is primarily 3 years. So think about the tuition cost times 3 is the overall cost of attending law school. Then you might add on, living expenses, room and board, that sort of thing. The data maybe 3 or 4 years ago that the average student graduating from a public law school had about $89,000 in debt, and an average student graduating from a private law school had about $127,000 in debt from law school. And if you're kind of thinking about what that would cost you later on, I think most law school loans have a 10-year repayment period, which is 120 months, and then there's an interest that you pay back as well when you're paying it back. So kind of a rule of thumb for what you'd be paying back monthly for a law school loan, we take the overall amount and pay 1% of that per month for 10 years. So if you graduated from a public law school and had $89,000 of debt, that's roughly $890 a month to pay it back for 10 years after graduating from law school. So if law school is going to make sense for you, that would mean that if you spent that much on law school, that the law school would boost your expected earnings by at least $890 per month for your career to cover the cost of going to school. And that's to say nothing about like the 3 years you lost working because you were in law school. So like my bottom line point, like think about whether it's a good investment for you to weigh like the costs, opportunity costs, the real costs, against the expected benefit you can get from the school. And there's some really good information about this now in terms of the outcomes for law students from schools. And I'll share some of it with you. This is some data that comes from the American Bar Association. They are getting schools, forcing schools now, to disclose their employment results. So these are the 2016 employment results for the Florida schools. And I just have them all up there. I put it the first column is their tuition per year, which varies considerably in the state of Florida. And then the third column is the percent employed. So this is kind of the number that law schools want you to see, like what percent of their graduates have a full-time job 3 months, 6 months after graduation. But the kind of sketchy thing that law schools have done, and these some of the lawsuits against schools for fraud, this is a pretty productive result. The ABA's helped with this. That some of the schools are reporting law students employed regardless if their job has any connection to the law. So reporting someone as employed because they work as a leasing officer in an apartment complex, or reporting them as employed because they are waiting tables. So the column that's really important is the percent employed as lawyers. If you ignore sort of the JD preferred, non-related jobs, those are the percent of law school graduates from a recent class that got jobs as lawyers. And it ranges really considerably from the low 70s at FIU, Florida, and FSU. But at schools like Florida Coastal, FAMU, very low on the list, less than half of the graduates are employed as lawyers after going to law school. And in some of those places, it's as low as 1/3 of the graduates got lawyer jobs after going to law school. And imagine if you're going to law school, you're probably thinking, I want to be able to use a law degree in the job. I'm not going to go to law school to get a job I could have got anyway, because it doesn't require a law degree. And then I put on that last column is the percent of graduates employed in big law firms. I feel like when I talk to students and they talk about like the kind of career they see themselves having, it's a lot of, well, I see myself practicing, in a major downtown law firm with an international practice, practicing some kind of corporate law, right? And so if you have a big client, like a big corporate client, big corporations are represented by big law firms. If you have a company that does international business, they work with law firms that have international offices. They, giant corporations don't hire a mom and pop local law firm to, conduct their own international business. So the last column is the percent of students who got employed at firms with 50 or more attorneys. Because those law schools, by the way, on that column, percent employed as lawyers, they're counting even people in solo practice employing themselves. That's a little scary. So the last column is the numbers. If you think about like that is the goal to get a major law firm job. Some of the schools are in single digits in terms of their percents. In some of the schools, you got your top 20% of your class, or 10 or 18% of your class. So even in some of the top law schools, getting that dream job of a major law firm, big employer, a fairly rare outcome.
Perry, is that within 9 months, I guess, of?
I think so.
Yeah, graduation,
I put up, if you want to look at other schools, I put up the link here, the employmentsummary.abaquestionnaire.org. It has all those schools in the country reported there. And it breaks it down, full-time, part-time, government work, clerkship. Yeah.
How soon must you pay back loans after law school? Is it like you get a 6-month period, or is it as soon as you get that Juris Doctorate, you must start paying back the loan?
I'm not sure, I don't think they give you much time to wait.
So
they may let you take the bar exam.
So it's just like
it's 6 or
immediate?
9 months, but I could be wrong. It's been so long since I was in that boat. Dr. Edward, do you know? Yeah, I think that there is a period of time because For example, when you get done here, you may have some loans. As long as you're in law school within, I believe, 6 months, you're 6 or 9 months, that those loans can remain, where you don't have to pay them back right away. So I imagine there's some period of time like that. It's not immediate though. I think someone was over there.
Yeah, so I think you just answered my question. It was about like, I wanted to, like, I know if you go working for like a school or like, don't they take off your tuition or your loan? Not tuition, your loan debt.
Those kind of things just are on a case-by-case, school-by-school basis. Some schools do have like loan repayment programs for certain types of work. We do really have to check into the school if they have the resources to do that or a commitment to it. Some do, but I wouldn't say that, I don't think that that's a universal thing.
And also, government, the percentage, it shows for the employed and lawyers, there's a place where they show government jobs.
So like a government job, like being a prosecutor or working for the government, that would be included in percent as employed as lawyers, unless it was a government job that didn't require a law degree.
So teaching law like you guys, would that be considered percent employed, the regular percent employed or the employed as lawyers?
Percent employed, because the JD is not required.
For teaching like legal studies courses or criminal law, like Professor Slaughter does, you need a JD degree to teach criminal procedure often.
Yeah, the legal studies then may be a JD required job, but most university teaching jobs don't require a JD. So it'd be JD preferred. So one way I suggest to think about like your return on investment is to think about the amount that the school charges in tuition over 3 years compared to the probability that they have a lawyer, employed lawyer resulting from it. So here I've kind of taken those two numbers and combined them to calculate the average cost in tuition per lawyer job created. So kind of taking the tuition, combining it with the percent employed by lawyers, and then rank the schools to kind of give you an idea of the value for how much tuition dollar the school is taking in per lawyer job created at the outcome. So according to this ranking, we have 3 schools that are at the top, close to the top: FIU, FSU, and Florida. Our public schools not only have relatively inexpensive tuition, but also fairly strong employment outcomes. I think the surprising thing here, I would find surprising, is that if you think about it this way, the cost compared to the outcome, that FAMU may be the 4th highest value among Florida schools. I mean, the employment prospects were fairly dim. I mean, I think one third employed as lawyers, but the tuition cost per year was $14,000 a year. So the inexpensive tuition is matching not phenomenal returns.
So that,
High risk, or low cost, low reward.
so you
kind of
say
makes a
that
good value.
Sorry, but you would say that FAMU is a good investment then?
Well, FAMU costs $14,000 a year, and after graduation, 38% were employed as lawyers, and 73% of students were employed overall. What I'm saying is that it's not a very, it's a risky investment, but at the same time, it's a fairly low cost, because if you were to take $14,000 times 3 years, that would be $42,000, which is roughly, I mean, some people spend $42,000 on a car. And you bought a $42,000 car and it didn't work very well for you, you would be disappointed, and it would be a big hit to you, but it would ruin you financially to buy a bad car. So maybe at FAMU and didn't get a job, I think it'd be kind of like buying a lemon car. But there are some schools in our state that have comparable employment outcomes to FAMU, but cost in the upper 30s or lower 40s, and don't have higher employment prospects. So I think if you spent, say, $129,000 at Florida Coastal for the same employment prospects as at FAMU, people don't, nearly spend $129,000 on a car for it to be a lemon. And if you spend $129,000 investing in law school and then didn't get a job afterwards and had the prospect of paying $1,290 a month back for the next 10 years, that could really set you back financially and in terms of your career path. So I think if you're in, my personal take, if you're looking in that tier of schools that's not below Stetson in Miami in the state of Florida, just based on the outcomes and low cost, FAMU may be your best bet.
Okay, so why is it Miami is such a low? No, it's a lot. I'm sorry. I didn't really know what my question was. I had it. in
Did the
my
Miami
head.
placement surprise you?
No, yeah, it's surprising because you're paying so much, but then
Yeah.
you're not making that much money compared to like the investment, like
Well,
what you pay for. You think of
The numbers are that the tuition at Miami is $46,000 a year, not including room and board, and 65% of Miami graduates get jobs employed as lawyers. So just based on those together, it's costing roughly $138,000 tuition dollars at Miami for every lawyer job created. I'll show you a slide. It's kind of interesting. So I'm comparing the tuition cost of the schools going up compared to the employment prospects on the y-axis to see if there's any kind of relationship between the more you pay for school in the state of Florida and the employment outcomes you get. And the strange thing about this, I did a regression. I didn't put the regression line in here. But in the state of Florida, among the Florida schools, there is zero relationship between the tuition dollars spent and the employment outcomes. So spending more on law schools in Florida, on average, doesn't result in higher employment prospects. So like I said here, if you're in that kind of lower tier, FAMU may not give you a better shot at the job, but doesn't cost as much as a school like Florida Coastal Berry or maybe even St. Thomas or Nova. And then you can really see the cluster in the upper left, like the best value schools, are schools that are both low costs and relatively high employment prospects at the end, FIU, FSU, and Florida. So I mean, those are the more competitive schools to get into, but if you're thinking about business-like investment, those are the ones that make sense. And just one last thing I want to say about this before I pass back for conclusion. Sometimes I advise students about like picking a law school, and I would say that some law students think about the cities they like or don't like, or the weather of a law school or something like that. I would advise you to try to put those thoughts aside as much as possible when you're thinking about a law school. Because like in an undergraduate, I think that's important, like your campus life and the fun of the school, if it has a good spirit, a good football team, and good weather, active social life. But in law school, it's a professional school. You know, where people are thinking about their professional jobs. A lot of them have past careers and they're older. They have their own families. It doesn't really, law schools don't have campuses with a campus life. There aren't fraternities or sororities. It's kind of like being in a monastery a little bit. You know, you got these really heavy books, they don't have pictures. You go to a dimly lit law library, you read all day, and then like 8 o'clock at night you get really drunk. So the weather's not really important because you're going to be in the law. You know, the social life is really not important because that's for undergraduates, not for the law students. So as much as you can, I think try to put those things aside. So even if you really had dreamed of spending a few years in Washington, D.C., and that sounded really nice to you, save the money, you know, because particularly for the top schools here in Florida, I mean, the tuition dollar you would have saved compared to the ranked school in your desirable location, and you could afford to visit that location many, many times. So think about it in terms of investment. What would, if it makes sense for you, and what would make the most sense for you?
Do you think it's important to go to a law school that you, in a state that you want to work in? Because what if you go to law school, like say you go to law school in Florida, but you want to work in another state, would you have to retake the bar?
Well, you have to take the bar. You take the bar wherever you start to practice. I mean, if you graduate from a Florida law school, you still have to take the Florida bar. But if you got a job in Colorado, you would take the Colorado
Well, would
bar.
you have to take the Florida bar as well as? Oh, you only take. Oh. Okay.
Yeah. And I would say, like, yeah, going to law school in Colorado would give you probably a leg up on a job in Colorado compared to being in Florida. But what's the cost of it? I mean, there's a value of it. You probably put a number on what it's worth. If the school in Colorado costs $20,000 more a year, that would be $60,000 more over 3 years. You say, okay, I get a little bit more advantage of getting a job in Colorado. Is that advantage worth $60,000? yeah, if I was already out in Colorado, it'd be a little cheaper to get to an interview with a Colorado law firm. But if I save $60,000, I could also get to Colorado and probably have some money left over after my trip to Colorado because I saved $60,000. So I think there is an advantage to it, but generally it may not be worth the cost of securing that advantage.
Do state law schools prepare you for that bar exam in that state? Like, does Florida prepare you for the Florida bar only, or does it prepare you for like just every state's bar?
The curriculum of law schools, I mean, the first year curriculum is fairly standard, and with some electives in the second or third year, but hardly any electives are tailored to the particular state. There could be a class on Florida procedure at a Florida law school, but for the most part, the state standard contracts evidence towards property, constitutional law, fairly standard curriculum, and then when you're done, people take bar review classes to learn some of the differences of that particular state law compared to like model federal law.
Thank you.
Is,
Yeah,
oh, I don't know if you were, I wanted to show that, can we show the stuff that Dr. Andrew has too? Is that, yeah, if you don't mind, yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, these are some, Dr. Andrew prepared this for us to give you, I've got a map here of some Florida stuff, but this is law school admission. Was it this year or last year?
It's the class that just entered.
Yeah.
This fall.
Look, we got 2 admits to Harvard and 9 to Emory, a couple to NYU, your alma mater. And so, let's see here, we go, University of Michigan, Georgetown, 7. We had one of our students graduate first in a class there about 3 or 4 years ago. And GW is an excellent school. Cornell, Columbia, University of Chicago is a top 4, 5, or 6 always law school, so that's great. Berkeley, assuming it hasn't burned to the ground at this point, we hope not. Boston University, got some relatives out there, and boy, they were about a mile and a half from where it was coming. American University in Washington, D.C. See here, and Wake Forest, Tulane. Tulane's an excellent school. William and Mary, I think a top 30 or top 40 at least law schools, so some really good results there. Whoops,
These are
sorry.
for UCF.
I'm sorry?
These are for the UCF who went to UCF.
I did not hear that, I'm sorry.
These are UCF people, yeah. They're
Yeah.
UCF.
Yeah, these are
UCF,
UCF students
right.
that applied and were admitted. Doesn't
Right.
mean they went. Some
Yeah.
cases they did not go.
Yeah, they may or may not have gone, but they were admitted to the school, yeah.
Any
Yale
accepted?
I'm sorry?
Any Yale accepted?
No,
I don't think so.
we've never had a student go to Yale.
Now, what I'm gonna do here for the, I guess, yeah, I think I should switch over to
Well,
that,
as
is
many apply.
give you a little profile,
The
and
ones
I
that
think I
actually
can,
need to go to Harvard, apply to Harvard first.
what do I do there? Is
Or
it,
Columbia.
everybody- that looks good. Everybody can see it pretty well? This will give you some Florida stuff. But before I get to the thing here, I wanted to add something. I think it was your question. Some people say that some people will maybe take the rankings too precisely. They might look at it and say, oh God, look at that, the University of Georgia is ranked 30, and Alabama, I think, is ranked 26th. You know, to be honest, when I looked at that, I didn't know there were 26 people in Alabama that could get into law school, but apparently I was wrong. But at any rate, the fact that Alabama's 26 and Georgia's 30, and then Florida's 41 and FSU's 48, here in Florida, no one gives a crap about that. No one's gonna go, oh, you went to a school ranked this much higher. It's the top, I would say, maybe up to 20, but particularly top 15. If you can get into one of those, used to call it T14 at Georgetown and Cornell, they flip-flop. But obviously NYU is one of them. Yale's always #1, Stanford, Harvard, flip-flop. University of Chicago, Duke, Michigan, you know, you've seen it. But you look at that, that's what you want to look for. The differences between, for example, I think 2 or 3 years ago, FSU was 45 and Florida was 48. So if you look at those rankings, it's not you shouldn't be controlled by them. Obviously, the higher the school, the better. If you go to a national school, you can walk in anywhere and they'll interview you. It opens doors that you just can't open any other way. But once you get beyond that, no one here in Florida is gonna, if you're gonna stay in Georgia, yeah, you go to the University of Georgia rather than Florida or Florida State. You know that's where you wanna work. But if you can get into Duke or Virginia or one of the other schools, then you gotta do some weighing. But one of the advantages of going to the, if you know you're gonna practice law as opposed to teach, guess where all of your friends are gonna be in 10, 15 years? Positions of power. They're gonna be judges and they're gonna be in the legislature and all this stuff, and you went to law school with them. So it gives you that advantage. So, but it probably doesn't overcome getting into one of the big time law schools. That's really a plus. So let's take a look at this. And I believe we've sent this to all of our majors, and you probably sent it out to yours or will. This chart here, because it gives you an idea of where the Florida stuff are. And once again, as Dr. Edwards' chart showed, the top schools that you want to look at are Florida, Florida State, FIU, Miami, and Stetson. And not necessarily in that order, but they're all ranked. There's all reasons. There's pluses and minuses. I would certainly want to visit the campus. If you do have a significant other, they're going to have to live there too. And you want to make sure, unless you're not that really attached, but it can't be someone who's too clingy. I mean, if you've got someone that needs lots of attention, not going to work. Because the old saying, a law's a jealous mistress, I think that's a little sexist, but you know the deal here, works both ways. You still should have time for somewhat of a life. That actually makes you do better in law school. You should have a hobby. If you run, make sure you keep running in law school. You just can't run as much. Play basketball every day. Just not as much, because it helps you. It helps you study. It helps you if you have some diversion. So it doesn't mean you can't plan it out and have some of that, but you've got to concentrate. And most law schools won't let you work. Most of the schools you want to get into won't let you work the first year. But your second and third year, if you've wondered why Miami is doing so well in FIU, it's because your second and third year, most people are getting jobs, 15, 20 hours a week. And the Miami's a great place for that. So is Stetson, because you got Tampa, St. Petersburg, FSU. That's why I picked FSU over Florida. It wasn't any Gator Seminole thing. It was simply state capital, plenty of jobs, also a smaller law school. But if you look at the big advantage U of F has, they got an alumni base that, it's gigantic. And we all know that because we see the license plates all over the frickin' place. And all the judges have the Gator Cup and all that stuff, but that's a good thing. It's a huge plus for them. So you definitely want to look at those schools first. And of course, on Dr. Edwards' chart, FIU, I think in 20 years, FIU is probably going to be at the top of the heap. Simply where they're down in the rankings a little bit is because they don't have any alumni base yet. They don't have people in positions of authority. And that's about 40% or so of how they do the rankings. But if you look here, look at some of these numbers, as Dr. Edwards pointed out on the chart. Some of these schools, and I left off Florida Coastal because my information is that they're going to close. They're planning on closing. So I did leave them off of this list. Maybe I shouldn't have, but that's the information I had. So their results are just awful. Oh, you have to. Oh, please give Dr. Edwards a round of applause. All that number stuff, man, that's just way above my pay grade. I can barely add single digits. But anyway, if you look at the GPA too, as Dr. Edwards pointed out, I look at that median. You at least want to be at the 25 percentile, or maybe you shouldn't think about applying. But again, if you're above one and below another, then it'll be of some help. Yes, sir.
So 2 quick questions. The number column, is that number admitted or number incoming?
No, this is the 75 percentile. So let's just take FIU for example. FIU, it means 75. Am I pointing right here?
No, I'm talking
No,
about the
he's
far
FSU.
column.
He's talking about the far number,
Sorry.
David. 140.
Oh, which one?
The far
No,
right.
far,
Oh, this is the number of enrollees, the number of students,
Okay,
I'm
so
sorry.
we're going into.
My fault, yeah.
Okay.
These are ones actually admitted, they actually enrolled, and in fact, we
Matriculated.
couldn't get these numbers until, I didn't have them all until 2 weeks ago. Until they got the final enrollment, passed ad drop, and all that
Right.
stuff, yeah. So it gives you an idea, Florida State last year had 153, much smaller school. Florida used to be at 500, but these are the numbers. Now, also wanted to show you the bar exam results, and this is a combination of both, I think I can maybe get that a little larger here. I'm not sure which thing I push here. I'll probably just leave it at this. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it'll be sent out. I think all legal studies students have it, and hopefully poli-sci can. But if you look, FIU again did the best on the bar exam. This is, I think, 3 years in a row that they've done that, and 4 of the last 5. You also have to look at numbers. That's the reason I put both February and July. Most people take it in July. I remember one year, Ave Maria was number 1. One person took it and they passed it. So you have to look at the numbers or else it's misleading. You don't want to just look at that. But if you look at Florida and FSU, they did pretty crappy in February, but just a real small number took it. What did I do? Did I knock something? I think I did, didn't I? Sorry, but I don't know what I did. Well, I'm mechanically completely, you can't say retarded anymore, intellectually challenged. Again, I'm not sure what I did with that. But again, you can see the numbers here and overall, but boy, when you look here at Florida Coastal at 41.7%, even FAMU was higher. FAMU was in the 60s last year. Berry was below 50, but if half of the students aren't passing the bar exam, that's a problem. So you really have to consider whether or not you want to invest your money that way. Again, just a couple more things. If anybody wants copies of this, they can email me directly if somehow you're not a legal studies or poli-sci major.
Nick's gonna put it on the political science
Oh,
free
great,
law thing.
super.
You get it
So
off that.
it should be available, it's on our website too, so, but if somehow anybody has any trouble, they can email me directly and I'll make sure they get a copy. But again, I think it's a good idea to go to the campus. These schools, they want you to apply, and they're usually really good about showing you around, letting you sit in on a class, and talk to some of the students and see how some of the students that are going there now feel about the school. Because it's an investment for 3 years, and particularly if you're here in Florida, get into Florida and Florida State, and then decide later which one you want to pick. Go ahead and apply for both of them. Don't write one off. And see if you like the area. And if you do have a significant other, again, that's an important aspect to look at. I want to make sure we have time for questions here. We've only got, I think they gave us till 4:20, so we definitely have the time for more questions, if anybody has any. Yeah.
Question, when you see law schools have enrolled 300 kids, how does class size factor into law school?
Oh, no, you're not all going to be in one class. Usually, I would say the normal process, but every law school can be a little different. The normal process would be to have maybe a couple of large sections and a small section of a given course. And I know most of you probably have looked at it and you've seen the information as to what the courses are in the first year. But you're definitely going to have legal research and legal writing. You're going to have civil procedure. You'll have contracts. You'll have torts. You'll have criminal law, criminal procedure, and the like. So you'll be, I'm sure you've looked at in constitutional law 1 and 2. You're going to have a similar type of arrangement when you get to law school. One thing though I wanted to add about the bar exam. It is a little easier. There's 3 parts to the bar exam. There's the multi-state, and no matter what law school you go to, they're going to prepare you for the multi-state, or hopefully. The subject matter is not pointed at one particular state. But then each state has a Florida part, or a Colorado part, or a Georgia part. And that part your second and third year, you can pick, like I had Florida constitutional law, Florida criminal procedure, Florida civil procedure. It definitely does help a little bit. You're a little more helpful to go into a school. If you know for sure you're gonna practice somewhere, that's probably where you ought to go, unless you get one of those big name schools. You get one of those top 20 schools, then it might take you a little longer to prepare for the bar exam. There's also an ethics part too, but that Florida part or Colorado part or Georgia part, the law school, in your third year, you certainly have the option of taking some electives that might help you prepare for the bar exam. And of course, the bar review course will prepare you for a state-specific bar exam. Multi-state is pretty much the same, but they'll clue you in on that individual state. Got one more minute here. They gave us the room till 4:20. Anybody got any other questions? If you do, and you don't want to hang around in here, so we can let Professor get squared away, we can go out to the side here, and I'll be happy, or over here. Okay, over on this side, Dr. Hamburger and I'll be hanging around out there if anybody has any additional questions. Thank you very much for attending. We appreciate you coming and getting information. Hopefully we've been of some help. And if you want to talk to us further, we're available for consultation.